Welcome to the Thursday Checkdown. I'm your host, Greg Kellogg. We're missing our co-host Tipp tonight. He is at the hospital with his girlfriend Alana's father, who is currently undergoing surgery. It's a 3 to 4 hour skin graft. It's not supposed to be life-threatening, but please include him in your prayers. But instead of Tipp, we have an IDP expert with us. And since we're talking IDP tonight, Iggy, how are you doing?
Doing well, Greg. All positive thoughts and prayers to Tipp. But I'm glad to be here. Glad to be here with JT, and glad to be here with you and talking some football.
Yeah, and we've got JT. We've got Justin Taylor with us, another IDP expert, and I'm actually on another screen got his bio. He's a host of the Stew with JT Brew podcast. It's part of Fantasy and Frames family, and he co-hosts of the Dynasty Evaluation podcast with John McGlynn. Now, he's an IDP ranker and writer for DynastyLeagueFootball.com, DLF, and he covers fantasy football, hockey, all kinds of sports gambling. JT plays in every type of fantasy football league, and I want to talk to him about some of these because I've never heard of them, and I've been in the industry forever. But Redraft, Dynasty, college fantasy football. I don't know what C2C is, and I know what Devy is, but I've never played Devy. He loves everything fantasy football. So JT, how you doing tonight?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on. Sorry, I don't have my usual setup here. I'm actually in Denver, Colorado, live right now, outside of Mile High Stadium. I had a trip out here this week. I got a friend that lives out here in Denver. We were expected to come earlier in the week, and I was going to be home by now. We actually had to come a couple days later because I had a fantasy draft in Chicago on Sunday, so I had to move the trip back. So I'm still here in Denver. So I'll do my best to kind of watch the sound and hope everything it sounds all right on that end. But yeah, I am live here down at the right across from Mile High Stadium in Denver. So it's been insanely hot, but a whole lot of fun.
Well, first of all, we're going to try to get into the IDP aspect because a lot of people are afraid of IDP. I know I was when I started. It was scoring only. There were no yardage bonuses. There was no live scoring. When I started, MFL, my fantasy league, was a desktop app. I started with a program called Couch Potato. That's how old I am. And really, the advantage of being old is that I know all the people that are now you guys as stars, the people that you look up to because we started the industry together. We really did. So my fortune is the timing. More than anything, it's the timing. So let me ask you, first of all, what is CFC?
So CFF is college fantasy football. So it's basically you're drafting college players, and it's only college production that matters on that side of things. So you'll see guys get drafted in way different order because you'll have guys at smaller schools. They're going to put up a ton of points, get drafted right away. Where some of your big time stud counterparts that are going to be high NFL draft picks maybe drop because their team they're not going to see as much action, or they play in a really hard conference or division. So CFF is college fantasy football. You play that on Fantrax. I also do a lot with Fantrax because of that. And then C2C. Yep, C2C is the other side of that. So you have a college side and an NFL team that are combined together. So basically you have two leagues in one. So when you have your college guys, you still get points. You still run that league, try to win that league like you would any fantasy football league. But when your guys graduate or go to the NFL, they leave and go to your NFL team. So you don't have to worry about being the worst team to get the best players, because if you already have them on your college team, they get them. I have a team that looks fire this year because I had CJ Stroud last year on my college team. I've got Brock Bowers for my college team, my pro team. Marvin Harrison Jr. was on my college team, a ton of other studs. So that's the one fun thing about playing C2C, among many other things. But if you can get that talent early and get them on your college team, you don't have to be that guy that's the worst team in the league in order to get the best players. You get those guys move up to the other side.
Iggy's nodding. Iggy, have you played C2C?
No, I have not played C2C, but it seems pretty interesting that you can basically get a player throughout their entire college career, So That's
Do you
kind of cool.
combine the college scoring with the pro scoring?
Or is it 2 championships?
So it's 2 championships. You're basically playing in 2 different leagues. Whenever your college guys graduate, they go to your NFL team. So the difference is like your NFL Dynasty rookie mock draft will only be like 1 or 2 rounds because it's those guys that are kind of like the late bloomers or got drafted really high and no one had them on their college team. So those college guys move up. So that's kind of how the C2C works. It's super fun to see those guys move up, get to have them for years and years of college, but also in the pros. And so there's different builds too, because it's like a Devy league in that you're drafting guys early, hoping that they become NFL stars or get drafted really high. But the only difference is with the C2C is that you're actually playing the college guys in a league, where in Devy you're just holding the rights to that player until he gets the NFL.
I know Iggy. Iggy's going to come up with a league that starts in high school. You watch. He's going to do that.
We scouting the Texas reports, man. California reports.
I'm in a league where you can draft guys in our college side as soon as they commit to a university. So you can draft juniors and seniors in high school if they've committed. You can't draft anybody before they're committed. But as soon as they commit and sign on the dotted line, you can draft those guys. So it gets way deep, down to there, like looking at some of these guys, and you're like, oh, I'm not going to see on my NFL team for 3, 4, maybe 5 years.
Now, listen, IDP scares people. I mean, your average fantasy guy really doesn't know football that well usually. So, which is why I love Scott Fishbowl, because a lot of the teams in it really don't know fantasy football that well. But IDP, you've got to know football, not just fantasy. You've got to know football. So I'm going to go Iggy first and then you, JT. Iggy, you've got this league that's been around for 10 years. They're nothing but regular offensive guys and a defensive team. How do you introduce them to IDP? Do you go full board? Do you go one player? Do you go 3 players? How do you do it?
I would recommend at least a 3-player minimum, preferably about 5. If you're running like a standard 2 running back, 2 wide receiver, tight end, flex, quarterback league, I think you could even go more than that. But 3 to 5 is a good starting number because it's manageable. 1, it just rotates it. There's not enough value in the position to really merit worrying about drafting strategies and so forth. But if you get 3 to 5, somebody could be like, you know what, I'm going to get the 3 best defensive players, come around 5, 6, 7. I'm just going to go just load up my defense and not have to worry about it. But just adds another element of drafting. It adds another element where if somebody gets the best 2 players, the best 2 offensive players in a draft, you don't have to, you can still beat them with the great defensive players as well. And so that's how I would answer that question, Greg. At least 3, probably no more than 6 for beginners.
Okay, JT, do you agree? And if you do, how do you break down the positions for IDP? Do you just say any 5 or 6? Do you go defensive line, linebackers, defensive backs? Do you break down the backs to safeties and corners? How do you do it, JT?
So it's a little bit different to me, depending on what type of league I'm running. So if I'm going to do a startup new league with new guys to IDP, I want to simplify it because, again, like you said, people get freaked out. They're like, hey, I don't know this. Now, the good thing is there is a lot of IDP content out there these days where if you got into IDP maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, you were really kind of on your own to figure out rankings, where to take guys. There wasn't a ton of availability of stuff, but there's a lot more every day coming out in IDP. So I always tell people I would go a little higher on the high side on defense, only because the leagues that I've done IDP where we tried to introduce it and we only did 1 to 3 players, almost every time those leagues ended up just getting rid of the IDP altogether because they just weren't important enough. We didn't put enough point total into it to make it worthwhile. So then people kind of felt like it was a waiver wire, just pick up, drop a guy. It's not that big of a deal. There's no reason to draft them early. So that's for me. I would say 6. I like to go 6, and I like to do this because you can do 2 D-line, 2 linebackers, 2 defensive backs. So you get a little bit of variety, get a little bit of a chance to kind of, try out different positions and do that now. I will say, if you're playing on like Sleeper or you're playing on like My Fantasy League, or I have a couple IDP leagues on Reality Sports Online, now you really want to pay attention to what format you're on, because the defensive players are not the same on every format, which is another reason why IDP is a little slow for people to come around to. Is it isn't 100% consistent scoring. The positions aren't super consistent of who has went where, how many starters you have. So I think as an IDP community, we're trying to kind of simplify some of those things. And then as you get into it, then you go, okay, now that I've got my feet wet, I can add on these things that make it a little more complicated. So I've got a league that we just started on Sleeper. We literally just finished drafting today. We've been drafting about a month, right around a month, and it was all IDP newbies. So me and my buddy John McGlynn started a league called IDP Leftovers, and so what we're doing is a 1-year startup, so everybody can get their feet wet, feel solid about it, and then next year we're going to start over brand new with a Dynasty League draft. So we're playing a 1-year redraft, just so people can kind of get the feeling for it, so they don't feel like, hey, I didn't know what I was doing first year and I got screwed up, and now I'm, for the long run, my team is in
They
trouble.
got to start over, yeah. So I'm a terrible host. I screwed up. IDP, for those that don't know, individual defensive players. Most people know that you can go with the team defense, which usually includes special teams too. But with today's game and looking at the Scott Fish Bowl, the added importance of kick returners in Scott Fish Bowl this year is going to be huge. And I was doing a little bit of research, and do you know that the league's best return guy last year is actually a cornerback?
Yeah,
For
Nixon.
The Green Bay Packers.
Yeah, Nixon. I'm putting together the draft kit for the sports affiliation. He's led the league in back-to-back years in returnage yards because he took it out of the end zone so much. We'll see how the new rules affect that. But yeah, those little things matter.
You have to return it now. I mean, you have to return it, and that's going to be interesting. I think I saw a stat that said of all the kickoffs last year, 22% were returned, and they're expecting that now not all kicks will be returned. Some won't be returnable. Some of them will go out of bounds. If the kick doesn't hit inside the red zone, inside that 20-yard area, the landing zone, you're going to get the ball at the 40-yard line. It's got to get at least to the 20, which means that, and because the kicks have to be returned, I think the biggest rule change is that until that ball touches a player or the ground, the defenders can't start downfield. They got to stick right where they're at until that ball touches the ground or a defender, which means that's a 15, 20-yard head start for the return guy. That's going to be huge. Now, I still think teams will adjust. And I think that if it gets to be too bad, you're going to see kickers just kicking it out of the end zone because then it goes to the 30. If teams are always starting between the 40 and the 50, they're just going to kick it out of the end zone and there won't be any returns. It'll just start at the 30. But not all kickers can kick it out of the end zone. So I'm going to go first to you, JT, and then I'm going to let you ask some questions too, Iggy. I want to get your opinion, though. IDP, we know wide receivers and running backs are going to be impacted, but like you say, Nixon, Green Bay, right? Green Bay Packers?
Yeah, Nixon, Green Bay.
Last 2 years, top return guy. This is a guy that could rival wide receivers and running backs in points. Unfortunately, in Scott Fish, you can't use him because there is no cornerback or return position. But in an IDP league, you could. So my question to you, JT, now I know you don't have the same scoring that Scott Fish Bowl does. Most people don't. But you're still going to have return yards, I'm assuming. How is Nixon going up your charts? Is he the top defensive back?
I love him. So as Iggy probably can test, if you have IDP leagues where you have return yards as points, if you can find defensive players that return, it is like a cheat code. I had a couple years ago, I tell this story all the time for people that are just kind of getting into IDP, but Adoree Jackson, when he was a rookie coming out of USC, was a All-American kick returner, punt returner, as well as a stud lockdown defensive back. Well, his rookie year, Tennessee played him in the slot, and he was the slot corner. He was on everybody's best guy. He was making tackles like crazy, and he kicked and punt return. He was a cheat code. He was my number one defensive player that year, scoring wise.
A lot of slot corners blitz a lot. Did he blitz a lot? Get some sacks too?
And that is the real cheat code. If you go into advanced leagues where you have to start a cornerback, you really want to find those slot corners that are actually rushing the passer or on a lot of the other team's best players. Because again, you making the most tackles, most pass deflections, impact plays. If you're a guy like a Kenny Moore on the Colts, they don't play much 3 linebacker. They're playing a lot of 2 linebacker, 1 linebacker sets. So Kenny Moore's up near the line. He's playing the slot. Those are the guys you want in those situations. And again, if you can find a guy like Nixon who's going to play all the time on defense, but also play special teams, those guys are fantastic in IDP leagues. And everyone, I'm a special teams fan. So every one of my leagues, I count special teams points that I run and I commish, especially IDP leagues. All my IDP leagues do return yards. So I'm really pumped about this new kickoff system. I'm hoping with punt returns too. I would love to see kick returns and punt returns come back a lot because, just a fair catch and the kick out of the end zone every play. I grew up in Illinois. Devin Hester was the man. Nothing was more exciting than getting a Devin Hester kickoff or punt return. And so, I want to see those days come back where those things matter again.
You're a kid. I grew up in Detroit, Lim Barney. I go way back. Iggy, your turn to ask the questions.
Yeah. Do you like any particular year 2 breakout candidate outside of Will Anderson? And if so, who are they?
Yeah, these year 2 guys are really interesting because it feels like, they get that real high value in their high pick that first year. And then if they don't play a lot, they kind of fall off people's radar. So if you're in a dynasty league, maybe you're still got them stashed. Maybe they're on your taxi squad. But for some of those leagues that don't have really deep league benches, or I have some big dynasty leagues where we don't have taxi squad, it's very hard to hold young defensive players because you need them to score points. So you end up dropping them a lot during the season because of injuries. I really like Lucas Van Ness from Green Bay. He was a young guy that we knew was going to take him a little time to kind of get in there. I think that Green Bay defense is really good. He's a guy that I liked coming out last year. I think it could be really interesting. Another guy that I like a lot. There's a couple guys who we're just not quite sure where they're at yet. As far as some of these defenses are really deep. So you're trying to figure out kind of where are these guys going to play. I've been really deep on a ton of the rookies because I've been doing so many rookie evaluations. So I know about those guys a little bit better.
Oh, yeah,
Junior Colson's my guy. He has been the whole time. I know when I first came out and said he was my IDP 1, I know people were kind of looking at me like, are you sure, dude? I don't think he's the number 1 linebacker. I loved him coming out of college, and then the landing spot was damn near perfect. Yeah, he went to Michigan, played for Jim Harbaugh, was the captain.
If I say that, JC beeps me. I can't say that word, but
he's the guy. He's the guy I love. He's moved way up draft boards. I think there's some. I will tell you this. There's some rookies that I don't think are going to do a lot this year, but I want to stash them. Johnny Newton out of Illinois, defensive tackle for Washington Commanders. Guy had a foot injury, was just an absolute stud in college. I saw him play live a bunch of times. Guy's got a motor. I just don't think he's going to see a lot of action this rookie year, especially coming off the foot injury. But he's a guy that I think could end up being one of these guys we talk about as just an elite pass rusher from the interior. So if you're playing in a league where you have to start a defensive tackle, he's one of my all-time favorite stashes right now. And another semi-cheat code for me, and I'll let people know, is a little more advanced IDP here. But if you get guys that are 3-4 defensive ends that get listed as a defensive tackle on my fantasy league, those are the guys you want. You want the Cam Haywards. You want the Darius Robinson out of Missouri for Arizona is my favorite guy right now. Because if you have to play a defensive tackle, he's going to count as a defensive tackle, but really he's a rush end playing in a 3-4. So that's the guy you want.
So we all love doing charity leagues like Scott Fishbowl. I've got to mention this. I'm in a brand new charity league this year called the FF7s which is the brainchild of the gentleman to my right and above you. Why don't you, Iggy, tell us a little bit about the FF7s? Number one, what is FF7? I mean, what does that name mean? Where's the money going to, the charity for it? And how big of an IDP footprint is there in this league?
Yeah, the footprint for the IDP is pretty large. But yeah, fantasy football sevens, it just comes from when you play football, you play sevens, which is basically means everybody but the offensive lineman and the defensive lineman. So your skill players, and then you have defensive backs, linebackers. But for the purpose of this, it was, you have to have 6 IDPs like we talked about. And JT, I got your record pulled up. We'll go over that here in a second. But the money goes to, last year we set the goal with Colorado with getting every rural hospital get an informative flyer for Kawasaki's disease awareness, symptoms, what to look for, what you can expect to happen. We spoke with the Rural Health Association of Colorado to make sure the guidelines are correct, the sizing and so forth. And this year we're going to extend that to New Mexico and hopefully Wyoming. Both of these, the mountain, the reason we're focusing on that is we live out here, but the mountain time zone is kind of like a forgotten, like rural part of the United States in a lot of ways. Most of it is rural. And I just wanted to focus on bringing attention to people that didn't know much about it, such as me, when my daughter got it and we had no idea what was going on. And we had a pretty traumatic experience with it. Luckily, it's, as long as you catch it early, you usually don't have to go through what we did with my daughter's heart dilated. But that's the whole thing. As long as you catch it early, you're aware of what it is, the symptoms can be taken care of relatively easily. So,
are you still looking for players in the FF7s?
Yeah, we're still looking for quite a few players, at least a dozen. We can always combine it down. I haven't invited too many, other big personalities in the industry, but we're going to expect some of them to come through as well. And if you want to get in, just go to the pinned tweet on mine IDP_Iggy. The Google there, the PayPal's there, and I'm also going to send out an email for people that don't have PayPal. We've donated over $2,200 to 3 different organizations that bring about Kawasaki's disease as well. So I'm going to put a link for one of them as well when we send out an email officially to everybody. But real quick, I want to talk about JT because he was in a really rough conference. So there's 16 teams in fantasy football sevens. You have your division of 4. You start out your first 3 games and your last 3 games are your division. And then the playoffs is the best 2 teams out of that division. You play each other for the right of your division to represent your division. That's what makes it a little bit more like a tournament than your standard just 1 through 8 rankings. And last year, JT, he won his first 5 games in a row. So he swept the division to start off. 1, 2, 3, got them all, including taking down Master IDP Leo, who won the King's Classic IDP. He would go on to have the last laugh, though, JT. I'm not sure if you remember. You won your game of the tournament, which happened in week 3 for you. You won the game of the week after a 2-week slip-up, and then you went on to be 9-5. You played Leo in the playoffs, and Leo went on to go ahead and win that tough league. What do you remember about fantasy football sevens? And, I know you're signed up for again this year, but what are your thoughts on that matchup against Leo, who kind of is crowned like the best IDP after winning the King's Classic, after winning his league and fantasy football sevens? Do you remember anything from that matchup?
Yeah, that was a crazy hard division. Our division was absolutely loaded. I remember getting signed up and got the invite, and I was just pumped to be in it. And then also I started looking through the division. We started looking at the draft, and I was like, oh, this is going to be a crazy hard division. We had Dynasty Santa was in there as well. I mean, we had a ton of heavy hitters in that division. I was able to sneak by Leo early, and then a late season, I had a down game from Christian McCaffrey, which ended up hurting me a little bit. And I had a couple IDP injuries near the end of the year that kind of buried me. My guys had looked so good all year. And then I kind of stumbled a little bit at the end. His injuries started catching up with me. And anybody who hasn't played in that league, the way the AE does the rosters and everything, you got to be totally aware. You can't stash guys. You have to be moving. If a guy gets hurt, he misses X amount of time. Sometimes you just can't hold on to that guy. Even though he might hurt you later in the year, you got to go get somebody else, or you're in trouble. Kyron Williams was a gigantic pickup for me in that league. So he helped me out a big time. I tell you what, I was going overnight. I'll give you a draft story. So we're drafting FS7s. I'm getting ready to go to bed overnight. I'm a late night guy. So a lot of times I'm up till like 3 or 4 in the morning. But if I'm up late and no one's made the pick and it's getting close to me, I'll throw on my auto pick. I'll have my queue set because I don't want people waiting 6-7 hours while I'm sleeping to make the pick. So I throw on my auto pick, but Sleeper only lets you put on auto. You can't like just auto pick one pick. So it ended up picking, and everyone got online and started picking, and it came back and picked my first 2 picks. And while I liked my first 2 picks, they were Tyreek Hill and CMC. Well, I'm looking at it, realizing as soon as it's picked for me that there's 16 teams in the division. I might not even have a starting quarterback on my roster by the time it gets back to me because I picked near the end of the first round, and I was freaking out. I literally was freaking out. I was like, this is going to be the worst showing ever if I don't even have a starting quarterback in this league. I lucked into Matt Stafford, and what really hurt me was I had Sam Howell, who got off to a great start for me, but then down the stretch kind of, faltered a little bit, and that hurt me in the playoffs. But, man, getting Stafford and Howell saved me early on and got me off to that really, really good start.
Yeah, nobody had a losing record. Y'all, everybody was 7-7 or above in the division. Pretty difficult to do with the way this is set up. Pretty much means you guys all dominated outside of your division and took turns beating each other. Great year, way to do it. Leo, he beat me, so I know the feeling as far as that goes. But that's a cool story, yeah. And it's a super flex league, Greg. So you need to be prepared for that. And there's only 5 bench players, so you have 15. And also, what I like about Fantasy Football 7s is you have the defense plus the special teams. So you could stack a defensive IDP with the defense. You could get TJ Watt and the Pittsburgh Steelers. You could get Nixon, and you could get all his return yards as an individual, and you could get his return yards as a team for the team of the Packers if you want as well. It creates a lot of strategy. I think it creates a lot of opportunities if you like going deep. Like JT said, you got to be aware with only 5 bench players though and 15 starters.
How many teams are signed up right now?
Look, I don't have the list pulled up. I believe right now we have 93 signed up, and there's about 4 or 5 guys that have been in it every year that haven't filled out the form. So I still think we got right around 13 or 12 positions to fill out what we had last year.
What did you get me into? You're going to embarrass me in this league.
Greg, it's a super fun league, but like he said, you gotta stay on top of things because with the small benches, you have to be willing to drop guys and go, hey, I know I drafted the guy pretty high, but sometimes you got to be able to move on from guys. And I loved it because the strategy was so different from everyone because of the short benches. Some people said, hey man, I just don't have a space to roster IDP bench guys. So people went like all out to the best guys early on, and then said, I'm just going to like pick up guys if someone gets hurt or is on waiver or, waiver wires if I have to make a move late. So ton of different strategies, but I saw a ton of different ways work for a lot of guys. And like I said, I was just happy I ended up with QBs at all because I was real nervous I wasn't going to have any.
So if you're listening to this after the show, IDP Iggy is the tag on X on Twitter. Reach out to Iggy. I realize that by law you can't ask for money to participate in this, but it's a charity league. Do you have a target for what you want each team to donate?
I mean, I don't have a suggested amount. If you wanted to do $1, if you wanted to do $20, of course, there's people that, told me, hey, I can't really donate right now. And I don't turn people away. So, I mean, last year we had a suggested donation of $10. This year, I'm not really putting an amount on it because of Wyoming having such a low population. I think we can get to where we need to with about $1,200. And we're pretty close to that right now. So I think we'll hit our target goal.
So let's get him a couple more people in this FF7s. But speaking of charity leagues, the godfather of charity leagues is starting to draft next week, and that's the Scott Fishbowl. And I'm loving all the thank you for letting me in, Scott, posts because I'm trying to follow everybody that's Scott Fish simply because I follow anybody that's fantasy football. Twitter for me is fantasy football. If I want to talk politics or I want to do family stuff, That's what Facebook's for. So for Twitter, it's fantasy football. Now, I may occasionally slip up and post something that's not fantasy football related, but 90% of what I post on Twitter is fantasy, or X is fantasy football related. JT, how many live drafts have you been to for Scott Fish?
Yeah, so the first year Scott came out with live drafts, hit me up, was like, "Hey, would you be interested in doing a live draft?" And I had originally got into Scott Fishbowl 9 was my very first one I was in. I won my way in on a Fantasy Cares Eliminator. I won my division and got in. I was so pumped to be in it. I ended up with the 12th pick, and I have to tell you, I finished the worst I've ever finished in any fantasy football league I've ever been in. Every one of my quarterbacks got hurt. It was the Le'Veon Bell to the Jets year. I thought Le'Veon would give one really great year, so I took him, I think, in the second or third round, thinking he was going to give me a bunch of points, and my team just bombed out. I think I ended up winning 2 games. I was like, I'll never get back in. He'll never invite me back in, but I kept applying. I kept playing the eliminators. I won another eliminator and got in, and then he was like, "Hey, it was like the very first year, like, hey, sign up for a live draft. You could do it." I host a ton of leagues. I love live drafts. It's my absolute favorite part of fantasy football is live drafting. So I was like, I'm in on a live draft. So ended up going to Chicago to the live draft there. Ended up meeting a ton of really good people. That's where I met my buddy John McGlynn that I do the Dynasty Evaluation show. We met at the draft, and we've been friends ever since. So I've met a lot of other guys there.
Is Howard Bender out of Chicago, or is that Jim Coventry?
No, Howard's in San Francisco for sure. I'm not sure
So
where Jim is.
Jim Coventry in Chicago then?
Yes, Jim has been in our live draft a couple times.
Okay.
Pat Fitzmaurice it drafted in front of me last year and stole everyone I wanted. So it's been a really good draft the last couple of years. Had a great time. I had a scheduling conflict this year where me and my dad helped run a huge collector car festival in our hometown in Illinois, and ended up falling on the same day as the Scott Fish Chicago live draft. So my dad said this might be his last year doing the car show, so I couldn't miss it. So I was like, I got to find something within driving distance. So Cincinnati's the week before. So a week from this Saturday is the Cincinnati live draft. So I'll be in Cincy. It's been a long time. I went to a Jets-Bengals game when I was I was like 8 or 9 years old. I was a huge Ickey Woods fan and a Boomer Esiason fan. So I went to a preseason Jets-Bengals game, had the worst seats in the entire Three Rivers Stadium. I think I was sitting behind a billboard. I had to bend over just to see half the field. It was we definitely got taken by the guy selling those tickets. But pumped to be back in Cincy. A ton of cool guys I've met online and through Twitter and done podcasts with, but a lot of guys I haven't never met in person. So it will be a cool. I'll miss all the guys in Chicago, but it's going to be a really cool thing to do event with a bunch of new guys that I haven't done one before.
Iggy, you're in Scott Fish, right?
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Are you drafting slow, or are you going to a live draft?
We're doing a slow one. I'm doing the My Fantasy League, website, Gandalf. So I'll be on there. I almost went to the Denver one. There's a lot of competition. I think Scott would let me participate in that one, but I'm waiting for Albuquerque. Albuquerque's a couple hours closer, and I think I'll just keep my hat, and hopefully we can get an Albuquerque one year.
My fantasy league teams may have an advantage this year because of the way they take your regular season scoring and combine that with your playoff scoring to get your score during the playoffs, because the My Fantasy Leagues can stream kickers. You can have a flex kicker, which you can't do on Sleeper. So it's possible that you may get a scoring advantage from that. Now, that said, I'm going to be in Houston July 6th for our live draft, and I am really looking forward to that. And I've asked my wife permission. She has not given it yet, for me to fly out to Vegas on the 27th of July for their live draft. And what I'm hoping for is the I think it's the satellite leagues. If Scott fills one up, he said he would wear a pickle romper to Vegas. And I'm hoping to get that on film, baby. If he wears and I've said that if I get film, pictures or video of Scott in a pickle romper, I will wear something equally outrageous to the expo. Now, JT, are you going to the expo this year?
I'm planning on it. I've got a little bit of a scheduling flaw. My son decided last second he wanted to play tackle football this year instead of flag for the first time. So our league starts like a month and a half earlier than it usually does. So usually I'm totally good. He's got a game that day. I'm trying to figure out how I can make it work and do both because it's his first game of the season, and I'm one of the coaches. I run the defense, so I'm trying to make it. So it's not 100% yes or no, but I'm trying to make it if I can make it work.
Iggy will definitely be there. Iggy, if Scott wears that pickle jumper, will you commit to wearing something outrageous? Doesn't have to be a romper. It can be anything, but something outrageous. Will you commit to that if Scott does it?
I mean, I don't know if I have anything outrageous to wear.
I'm going to buy something. I'm going to buy something for it. I don't have anything like that. Wear a tux.
I mean, yeah. I mean, I guess I could commit to something like that. Yeah, no problem. I'm going to be there. So if we get it there, I can commit on live television to doing something. Maybe not all day, but part of the day. Because I'll be on the panel. So I'd like to dress a little nice for that as well.
I think that we should, as a crew, Scott is a friend. Scott's first podcast appearance was with Gary Davenport, who I'm sure you know, JT, and myself. Gary and I ran a podcast back in the 90s. Okay. Scott's first and Bob Long's first podcast appearance was with us. That's how I got into the Scott Fishbowl. I had no idea he had a waiting list. None. I was retired from fantasy for 6 years. I didn't watch any NFL. I didn't do anything. I decided I wanted to play. I heard about this Scott Fishbowl thing. I did not remember Scott. I feel terrible about that because he's a really great guy. But he remembered me, and so he put me into Scott Fishbowl 11. I didn't make the playoffs first year. Second year, I made it to the first round. Third year, I made it to the second round. This is my fourth year, and I am looking forward to it. But I want to have fun with Scott. Maybe we can convince him to add an IDP couple players next year. Wouldn't that be fun?
Yeah, they're always doing something to tweak it up. And JT, this is going to be your fourth year as well, or your third?
Yes. Yep. So this is year number 4 for me. 3 years in a row. Like I said, I did Scott Fishbowl 9, and then I was in 11, 12, 13, and then the 14 this year. So actually, this will be this will be fine for me. So, but I did the FC Fantasy Eliminators. I know Scott's trying some things out, but we actually have a CFF college eliminator for Scott Fishbowl this year. So I know he's talking about doing some IDP stuff because me and a lot of the other college analysts all got on, did a show. We'll have a show coming up here, I think in the next week or two, Fantasy in Frames. We are going to do our podcast with me and a couple of the other guests, Chris B from Fantasy in Frames. We ended up in the same league. And we're going to break down the draft, how we did it as a redraft Scott Fishbowl scoring type of system. So it'll be pretty interesting. So I think he's definitely looking to open things up. He's done guillotine leagues the last couple of years. I won one of the guillotine leagues one year. He's added the college. I think IDP is around the corner. That might end up being a special section of it at some point, but I definitely know that some of these things are coming.
Hey, I'm going to let you go next, Iggy, but I just saw Surf Football and Wendy, and I wanted to say hi to them. But Surf Football said, shout out to the Potathon, which I don't know if you've seen it, but I've seen the list of. My wife is going to kill me because I'm going to put that on the big screen TV and watch it all day long. I am really looking forward to that because the names in that thing, I know a lot of these guys. I mean, they're friends, and that is something that part of what got me back was to see guys like Scott Engel and Bob Harris that I grew up in the industry with. Andy Behrens, guys. Matt Harmon. These guys have been around for 20 years, and so was I. So I think what people don't understand, you have your own website. You have your own content. You're coming on my show. All right. I'll go on your show anytime you ask. Iggy will go on anybody's show anytime they ask. We help each other grow. The industry is full of great people. It really is. And, you're going to get your few shysters and con guys, but they don't last. I keep telling Iggy that. If you're in this industry 10 years, you're a good person. Because if you're a bad person, you won't last 10 years. You will be shunned. So, Iggy, your turn.
No, yeah. JT, I just wanted to know, we've talked a lot about your leagues and you've done a lot of live drafts, but when was your first league? How long have you been playing fantasy football? And, what hooked you in? And, when was your first championship?
Yeah, so I grew up played football in high school, looked at possibly playing in college, decided I wanted to go the other route and wanted to get into sports journalism. So that's my actual background as I got into sports journalism, covering high school, college sports, pro sports, all the way back in the newspaper days in the late 90s. I worked at a couple TV stations, ESPN radio. I've worked for a bunch of people over the different years. So I got in my first league with a bunch of Missouri Tiger alum. I was working at a TV, a Columbia Daily Tribune, the newspaper in Columbia, Missouri. And my boss at the time, Joe Waljasper, was like, hey, we got a bunch of these big wigs, CBS, ESPN, all guys who went to Mizzou. We have a league. We're at 10 teams. We want to expand it to 12. You want in? And I was like, abso-freaking-lutely, I want in. So got in. That started me. My very first league was probably 99 was my first actual fantasy league, 1999, but I watched nothing but college football, pro football growing up religiously. So I played a ton of video games, ton of college football, ton of Madden. So I knew a lot of the players already from just that idea of things, and then just kind of grew from there. I ended up moving home about 15 years ago back to Illinois. I got a bunch of my old friends from high school. It's like, hey, do you guys want to start a fantasy football league? And they're like, oh, we're in a couple, but sure, we'll get in another one. And I just kept getting in other leagues. And it was like 4 or 5 for a while. Then it kind of ballooned up to 8 as people started going, oh, well, if you need somebody, Justin will get in your league. So it kind of went to 8. And then when I got into Scott Fishbowl the first time, it just exploded because so many people were like, oh, you're in the chat, you're active at the draft, all this stuff. So I started getting invited to leagues all across the country with all kinds of fantasy football experts and people. And then, like I said, my first live draft a couple years ago, John McGlynn, met him. He got me into podcasting. Like I said, before that, I had written for newspapers, everything forever. And I was like, oh, this would be a nice, good way for me to kind of get back into it, doing it from the fantasy perspective. So did that. And I've been running leagues now, going right on 20 years. My longest league I've got right now is in year 16, and it was my very first Dynasty and IDP league combined. We started as one league. I think our draft took like 4 hours or 5 hours, maybe longer. It was a really long draft, the first one, as we were all trying to figure it out. We didn't know what anybody was worth. It was all auction style. It was wild, but that league has been around forever. Love it, and I just keep getting more IDP leagues. I've really gotten into a ton of the college stuff the last couple seasons, so that's been my big ad. And then like we talked about, getting in guys that aren't in IDP leagues, wanting to see them get into leagues. So I've jumped in a couple more here of late just to kind of try to work through that with guys that want to try it out and are looking for some advice and somebody to help in the league.
I love it. Go ahead, Greg.
Oh, I was just going to say my oldest league, I'm not a member of anymore. When I retired, I stepped away from FanX, the Fantasy Experts League that we started, I think, 97 or 98. We did actual live drafts in Vegas during the Fantasy Insights conventions in Vegas, and we called it the FanX Analysis Draft, which I just found out Bob Lung is in and is still doing the FanX Analysis Draft. I would love, and I've talked to Bob about this, to see a King's Classic Analysis Draft where they're on stage, 1 or 2 sentences for each pick they made. And then at the end of the round, 2 or 3 questions from the audience. Tie the audience into the draft. You're not going to get the whole draft, but you might get 6 to 10 rounds. You might be able to get 6 to 10 rounds in an hour, hour and a half. And I think when you tie the audience in, it does an excitement level. Now, What do you think, JT? Do you think that Bob should include a King's Classic analysis draft?
I think that would be great. So what I love live drafts, and I've said it a million times. If I can live draft, I'm live drafting. I know it's harder these days. Everybody's getting older, you got kids running around doing stuff. But the live draft, getting with your buddies, ribbing each other, handing out the trophy. That's the best part of it. That's why we do fantasy. Yeah, we want to win money. Yeah, we want to win championships. But we do it for camaraderie, playing against each other, competing. That's a fun part. So my draft, my home leagues, I have a big old draft board I had made like 15 years ago. We go up, we say, I get a speaker, we announce the picks, who's picking who. We have a draft girl that goes up and writes them on the board. Super fun. It's just a great time. We always do it usually in August, early part of August, but it's just everybody has such a blast.
Is she in a bikini?
Not usually a bikini because we have it at my bar and brewery. So she does get to wear wherever she wants. But we usually do, because it's not a bikini. But, a big fan of football jerseys, big fan of referee uniforms. All those have been seen over the years. But I love to make the live draft something special. And for anybody, we talked about earlier, but anybody who had not been to Scott Fishbowl Live, they actually have turned every individual live draft into a huge fundraiser. A ton of people are giving stuff away that you can auction off at the draft. I got White Sox tickets against the Detroit Tigers last year at the Chicago live draft. I'm doing a brewery package from my brewery, JT Walker's Brewery. We're giving away a bunch of shirts, hats, beer. I've got a ton of stuff for people that are craft beer, lovers. So I think just every way he's doing this is adding more things and making that live draft just that much better. But you can't beat a live draft. My dream is the live draft in Vegas with one of my main home leagues. That would be absolutely the best thing ever.
Well, my dream is to have Scott invite me to go to a live draft overseas with one of his Scott Fishbowl's overseas ones. Now, I don't really want to go to Sao Paulo, not because I wouldn't love to go to Brazil. I really would. I haven't been there, but because I don't speak Spanish. And I think London would be amazing to go to London because I realize Londonites don't really speak English, but it's close enough that I can understand it.
Yeah. The accents could be pretty thick, and there's a great minds in the UK. The current emperor, as I like to say, because there's 7 right now in fantasy football, 7s. So each one you could be the king or the queen of that, but the person that does the best in the final round is the emperor or the empress, and they rule the land. And right now that crown is in London, or in the United Kingdom. I mean, not London. So we got to bring it back. Bring it back.
We're at the UK.
I wanted to say Nottingham off the top. I don't have it exactly written down, but somewhere not in London, outside of London.
You should make a trip over. In fact, I've got a league called Beat a Hall of Famer. Okay. I didn't win it last year. Okay. I didn't win it the first year. I'm thinking about getting together with Trophy Smack. I've got to get a contact. I don't know anybody at Trophy Smack, but I want to find out how much it would cost to buy a ring for the Beat a Hall of Famer League, and I would give a ring to the people that beat me. Because, look, the truth is, no matter how good you are at this game, you can lose because there's so many variables. I just want to make the playoffs every year. If I make the playoffs, I'm happy. If I win, great. But if I don't win, then somebody has a chance to say, I beat a Hall of Famer.
Playoffs? Playoffs?
Yeah, that's right.
Hey, Greg, I gotta get you hooked up with my guy John McGlynn. He runs a bunch of home leagues, and he buys a championship ring for whoever wins every one of his home leagues every year. I'll get you hooked up with him. He's the guy that knows where to get the rings, how to do all the good stuff for that, because he does that for all his leagues. Super fun. That's actually I just had a draft, our home league for the Babies and Boomers draft, up there on Saturday in Chicago. So that's why I'm still in Denver. I had to go to Denver a couple days late because I couldn't miss the home league live draft. So I had to move everything back. But John McGlynn's the guy to talk to. Trophy Smack has great stuff. But like I said, John, he's the guy because he is the king of the rings. He buys rings for everybody. He'll tell you where to go and what to do.
Oh, see,
Perfect. And JT,
I had to send that too. That's the Wink. Greg, you know who Winkenbach is after
yeah, I do.
the first fantasy football commissioner. So it says Wink right there. I'm not sure if you can see it,
I
but
do, yeah.
you win that if you win fantasy football sevens. And we ship it. You get your name on it. And if Winkenbach, if you don't know, he's the first fantasy football commissioner. Took it very serious. Would write letters, send out mail back when you had to put it in a postage and send it.
Oakland Raiders front office. Yeah, I know what
Oakland.
Winkenbach is.
So yeah, and he had defensive players. He started the first fantasy football league, and they had defensive players. That's how important I think IDPs are.
But they didn't do tackles. They didn't do yardage. All they did was scoring.
Yeah. Well, scoring.
The defensive players only scored if they scored a defensive touchdown or got a safety.
Or kicked the field goal, because you had certain defensive tackles that would kick field goals back then. They're like, just get that big guy out there and put his foot on it. But JT, I wanted to ask, I live in what they call the Napa Valley of microbrews here in Durango, Colorado. So I just wanted to know, what is your favorite with your brewing company? Do you have a particular favorite? And then also, I got to ask another football question. Where's your temperature on Bobby Wagner being for the Washington Commanders? Is he still just going to keep being like one of the best tackling machines? He led all players in assisted tackles last year with 87, I believe. Do you think he's going to be good? And then last question with the beer also, is it hard to make a Pilsner? I don't know if that counts as a microbrew, but that's a beer that I'm interested in making and brewing myself.
Yeah, so first I'll start off with Bobby Wagner. I think he has a good season. I really do. I'm still in on him. I'm still in on like CJ Mosley, some of those older guys, because all they do is just get tackles. I mean, that's what those guys do. We've seen that they're like, just because they're getting older doesn't mean they're slowing down. I mean, they're still putting up crazy good IDP stats. They're guys even though it is Dynasty in most of my leagues, those are guys that I'm still high on. And if I'm in a redraft league or I'm in a charity league that does IDP, I'm all over him for this year. I think he's going to be really good. I like him next to Frank Luvu there for the Commanders. I think that's going to be a really, really nice defensive package there with those guys playing linebacker. So he's definitely a guy I'm a big fan of. At JT Walker's Brewery, my favorite beer we make it's called the Daniel T. Porter. Daniel T. Porter was a guy who was from Connecticut, ended up in Illinois, started our town, was the first postmaster and first bar owner in our town, eventually moved to Texas and lived in Texas and started Muhammad, Texas. So there's only two Muhammads in all of the United States, one in Illinois, one in Texas, started by the same guy. So we have a beer we call the John T. Porter. It is we do a bourbon barrel-aged Imperial Porter every year in November for our anniversary. So that's my favorite beer we make. I am outside of the porters and the stouts. Those ones are I like the most, but obviously when it's real hot outside, sometimes you got to get something a little more easy drinking, a little bit cooler. I am an IPA guy, so I do like IPA, some hazies. We make a sour called Brewer in the Ambulance. That was off of one of our music series back in the day. It was supposed to be a one-time thing, and then everybody really liked it. So we keep bringing it back. It's a blackberry raspberry sour that's got a nice little tartness to it that's really good if you're like in the summer, if you're golfing or you're out on the lake, fishing, boating, stuff like that. It's just got a nice little fruit kick to it without being too over the top. But I tend to lean IPAs and hazies most of the time on my craft beers. But I'm a big whiskey guy. So anything that's bourbon barrel aged, I'm usually a big fan of.
But how do you do a Pilsner? That's what he wants to do.
Yep. So a Pilsner is there. So Pilsner is a lighter style, European German style. So a lot of times in the United States, we call it a domestic lager, a Bud Light, Coors Light, that type of thing. Well, in Europe, that is their style of that, so it's not quite as light. Pilsner's got a little more full body in there, but Pilsner's done right are fantastic beers to drink in the summer. Just thirst quenchers, really nice. you love that 7-10% beer, but sometimes you want to have a couple beers. And so you got to have like a 4.5%, 5% beer. And that's where a nice Pilsner comes in. So yeah, if you can find a nice German Pils is the way to go. We make one. We just don't make it all the time. But Pilsners are coming back. Lighter beers are coming back around because people are starting to see, just the drinkability of them. And the craft breweries, especially in Colorado, there's a lot of really solid Pilsners coming out.
Yeah, I always like ginger beer or root beer. I mean, the zero alcohol ones are the ones that I do. But no, I've got to thank you for coming on, JT. It's been great. Afterwards, DM me. I'll give you all my contact, including my phone number and everything. Let's stay in touch. And if you do make it to the expo, again, everybody, get to the expo. You meet people. And the great thing about this hobby is I've never met anybody that's a serious fantasy football person that won't talk football to you. I mean, we all love talking football. We know that we may disagree on player evaluation. I wanted to ask you one more question, and that just popped in my head. You love Junior Colson. I love Blake Corum. I love JJ. Roman Wilson, JJ, Blake Corum, and Junior Colson, how many of them finished number one in the rookie class at their position?
Oh, I think that's a good one. I do think Colson's going to have a decent shot to be the rookie LB1. I just think he's going to go in there. I think he's going to have a chance to be the captain and wear that green dot right away. So I like it. I like Roman Wilson. If the Steelers don't go out and make a crazy move for some other big name wide receiver, I actually think Wilson is going to have some really nice upside. It's a tough rookie class for wide receivers, as we all know. And I'm a big George Pickens guy. Have been for a long time. I just love what Pickens brings, and I think he's going to be even better. But I think Wilson is definitely going to be an upgrade there. I like, with no Deontay Johnson there, I like Roman Wilson a lot. Corum's a guy, like, I've never been a huge Kyron Williams guy. He was solid last year. You can't turn down what he did. But, man, any kind of injury, I can see Blake running away with that thing. Again, Blake Corum's just a guy that knows football. He's just a football player. He's tough. And I tell you what, if you're in a dynasty and you can stash, I like J.J. McCarthy. I saw him in Indianapolis at the combine this year. I only live a couple hours from Indy. Went over on that wide receiver running back wide receiver quarterback day. And I tell you what, watching him live, he just popped. He really did. Like the way he threw the ball, just like his moxie, the speed. You could just hear he had a little more zip than. And there was, Joe Milton was throwing an 80-yarder, so it wasn't like he was going against nobody. But he was impressing me just as much with his arm strength. I think McCarthy is a great stash. Is he going to have a great fantasy this year? I don't know, but I like that Viking system. I love O'Connell as a coach. I think he's the guy that I just took him in a startup draft in the 6th round where I went real young and I went Anthony Richardson in the 1st round. I'm looking for a decade of JJ and AR. So I do like him a lot too. My mom's family's all from Michigan, so I've got a heart for Michigan players as well.
I can't say a word because JC always hits me with the Ohio State saying, Ohio State wins, Ohio State. Can't stand that. So I like to get my guests to say it for me. Anyway, thank you so much for coming on. If you ever need anything from us at the TSA, just ask. Just ask. You need a guest, we'll come on. You need advice, we'll give it. Might not be right, but we'll give it. But if you need anything, you just let us know because we really appreciate you and what you do for the hobby.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much for having me on. It's been a great time.
Yeah, JT, really appreciate you being on. Greg, what are we doing for July 4th next week?
What are we doing? Well, July 6th, I'm drafting live in Houston at the Spindle Tap Brewery. That's what I'm doing. July 4th, I'm looking out at fireworks, I'm sure. I'm going to go somewhere where there's fireworks.
Well,
anyway, that's our show. That's our show for tonight. Do you have anything else, Iggy?
Yeah, just thanks, JT, for being on here. As always, go follow him at JT Orange, I believe, is what you have on the X or the Twitter, whatever you want to call it.
Where's your work at, JT?
So, I usually post everything I can on JT Orange on Twitter, so you can go there. But Fantasy and Frames, I do the Shoot the Gap podcast every Wednesday when I'm in town with Jorge, who's a great guy who runs Fantasy and Frames. Then I have my show, The Stew with JT Brew, that I throw on there. That I do a lot of gambling talk once the season kind of rolls around. And then the Dynasty Evaluation I do with John McGlynn. He's also there on Fantasy and Frames. We do a lot of day shows. Me and John have some crazy work schedules, so a lot of times we'll do a lot of live day shows in the middle of the afternoon to kind of keep people interested while they're at work. So we do a lot of that stuff. DLF, you can find my top 150 rankings for IDP. I also have my top 25 rookie IDP rankings up there as well. I write a ton of IDP content for them in the off season, and I also do a ton of rookie stuff. So if you're ever looking at rookie stuff, looking for evaluations of players before and after the draft, I write a lot of the rookie articles on offense and defensive guys there as well. Fantrax, check us out there. I do some stuff for Fantrax, some IDP stuff for them. It just kind of keeps expanding. Like you've got to do it a little more for everybody kind of all over. But yeah, definitely check me out at any of those places.
Got to ask you something. It just popped up on the screen. Surf Football. Don't know if you've seen him. He's got a bunch of unique twists to the game of fantasy football. And I think people should get to know Surf Football because Mike is a pretty cool guy, and I like some of his ideas. But he said his favorite Michigan Wolverine is Mike Sainristil. I love Sainristil. Is he going to be a top DB this year?
He's a guy that I'm targeting in IDP leagues where you have to start a cornerback. Because I don't know if you're in a sleeper league where it's all defensive backs combined, how much he's going to give you value this season. But if I'm in deep IDP leagues on MFL where you have to start a cornerback, I think he's going to get that slot corner role for Washington. And that we've seen in Dan Quinn's defense, that can be a really, really advantageous IDP spot to play that slot corner. I think he's going to be all over the field. I think they're going to have him doing a little bit of everything. So in an IDP where you have to have cornerback, yes, he is a buy for me. I'm absolutely taking him in leagues that you have start CD.
If I recall correctly, he started his career at Michigan as a wide receiver and switched over to corner. So he could be one of these two-way guys, but I also think he also returned kicks. So you could see him on the kickoff return, which is going to be huge for players this year.
Yeah. We kind of talked about Scott Fishbowl. That's going to be the real kicker this year. How much do these return yards count? Because he really upped the return yards, kind of lowered the QB yards. I will tell people, if you haven't watched the show or you haven't seen anything yet, we've been doing a lot of mocks on Fantasy and Frames for Scott Fishbowl. I've probably done 4 or 5 at least already. Rashid Shaheed from the Saints is a guy that is getting drafted real high for the kick return, punt return availability. But my sleeper pick, I've been telling people this, I'm a Colts season ticket holder, go to all Colts games. Anthony Gould, Oregon State rookie. I think he kicks and punt returns for the Colts. And I think if there's any injuries, he gets in the top 3 or 4. I think right now he's maybe wide receiver 5 on that team, but he could see some playing time on offense. And I think they specifically drafted him for kick and punt return yards. So he's a sneaky play in a league like that late in the draft.
Here's a couple more that I'm targeting. Kavontae Turpin for Dallas. He returns both kicks and punts. Xavier Gibson, and I'm not sure what team he's on, but he returns kicks and punts. And I can't pronounce the guy's name from Minnesota, but he's a running back, 3rd, 4th string running back. Kwangu. I mean, I just can't pronounce it.
I always have to come up with nicknames for these guys because I can't ever. It starts with an N and a W. Yeah, he's a guy that definitely, I think he's on the list of guys you want to keep an eye out for as well.
Anybody from you, Iggy?
I'm trying to pull up my list right now. It's going. I had the top 10.
Marvin Mims, JC, yeah.
Nick Nixon, like we already talked about, he's the potential to
but
lead.
You can't do him in Scott Fish.
Oh, yeah. There's a wide receiver. No, not. I mean, what's the kid from Jets? He was Gibson. Gibson
Yeah,
could.
Xavier Gibson. Yeah.
Yeah, Gibson could be another sneaky guy. I think he was in the top 3 for return yards last year.
Here's an
Caleb
older.
Freeman for Detroit returns punts but not kicks. And they're thinking that this kid, Sean Vacchi, the running back they took.
Yeah, Vakai, yeah, he's going to be all over special teams. It's going to be interesting to see how he ends up playing for the Lions, because he's a guy I think he's going to be a really good NFL player. Now, how much can he give you in fantasy? I'm not 100% sure, but the guy's going to be, they specifically drafted him for him being a special team stud. So he's definitely a guy that I think can play everywhere. I was trying to think of one more, an older player that I think is maybe sneaky to keep an eye on is Devin Duvernay, no longer on the Ravens, now on the Jags.
Jacksonville, yep.
I like the idea of him getting some wide receiver 4 work with them and possibly kick punt returning with the new system. So he's a guy that I've been grabbing real late in drafts as just like, hey, I'm going to take a wait and see if he ends up kick returning and being a good kick return, which he has been throughout his career. If he gets more opportunities now, he's a guy that could be sneaky because he could see some actual play on offense as well.
And if you need a running back, if you need a running back late, Cordarrelle Patterson is listed as a running back. I mean, he started as a wide receiver, but I think he's not with the Jets.
Steelers. He's with the
Patterson
with the Steelers.
Yeah. He went with Arthur Smith. They both went together. So.
Yeah, and he's going to be returning kicks, and he'll probably get some play in that backfield. Although I expect Najee to get most of the work there.
Marvin Mims had 709 return yards. Braxton Berrios, 676. Duvernay had 464. So there's some options there. Greg Dortch, I'm not sure if it'll be him or if it'll be Dallas, DJ Dallas. But DJ Dallas, a running back that returns kicks, he had 705 for Arizona. We'll have to see who they use. That'll be an interesting thing to keep in mind for training camp.
I'm on Iggy with Marvin Mims. I think Marvin Mims is a steal. Scott Fishbowl. I think if you draft it's Scott Fishbowl, you're going to have to get him fairly early in the live drafts, because I think you're going to see his ADP shoot way up once you see the live drafts over, and everyone who's slow drafting is going to be going to have to go out and take him way earlier than they want, because I just think he's a guy that's going to be a top 2 wide receiver for them, and we saw what he could do last year on special teams. The guy is really good on special teams. So he's a guy that's kind of been one of my sneaky picks that I've been getting kind of in the mid rounds right now. And I think he's just going to keep going up and up in Scott Fishbowl leagues.
I would look for him right after Rashad Shaheed goes, because he's going usually a round or 2 later than Shaheed. And the thing is that, and I didn't verify this, but I was told this, after Shaheed got the wide receiver 2 job, he didn't return kicks anymore last year. So everybody's counting on him to return kicks this year. If he's the wide receiver 2 there, he may not be returning kicks.
Well, and that's going to be the interesting thing here for Scott Fishbowl is we're not going to know a lot of these special teams guys until mid-August, and we're drafting in July. So it's going to be tough, because you are kind of really guessing, because I say it all the time. Some of these guys, you don't want them to be too high up off the offensive depth chart, because they do, then they, like you said, they get taken off. Tyreek Hill as a rookie was killer for me, playing wide out, running the ball, kick returning, punt returning. He was awesome. And of course, as soon as he becomes the wide receiver 1, no more kick and punt returning for him. So that tends to happen too with guys. So that's why I like some of these younger guys, and I like a few of the older guys that, the team kind of knows they're already wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4. You don't have to worry about, even if they get an offensive, increased role in offense, them getting completely taken out of special teams. But some of the young guys, it could happen.
Dante Hill and Devin Hester. I miss those days where or even Lombardi. You knew he was going to return punts, even though he was a starting corner, because he was the best punt returner in the league at the time. So anyway, JT, thanks for staying over. We went overtime. We appreciate everybody listening. All right. You can take us out, JC. You can take us out. Just don't play that Ohio State thing.